I always believed that the hardest part of life was earning success. I thought that if I worked long enough, sacrificed enough, and pushed myself past every limit, the world would finally notice me. I thought that on the day I achieved something monumental, my life would feel complete. I was wrong. The day everything changed didn't come with a warning. It didn't come with a fanfare or a moment of quiet reflection. It came in the form of a single shattering phone call. One sentence that would make me question everything I had ever believed about family, loyalty, and self-worth. I had spent years building toward this one moment. 7 years of sleepless nights, endless exams, sacrificing friendships, missing birthdays, and letting every ounce of myself be poured into the dream. And finally, it was here. I was about to step onto a stage that symbolized years of struggle and determination, a stage that would say my name out loud, officially, formally, to the world. My life as I knew it was supposed to culminate in applause, pride, and love from those who mattered most. I imagined it perfectly in my mind 1,000 times. My parents sitting in the front row, faces streaked with tears, proud, cheering, finally seeing me for the person I had become. But when the morning arrived, reality hit me like a cold slap across the face. My mom's voice, normally warm and reassuring, was rushed, light, almost rehearsed. We can't make it," she said. The words didn't fully register at first. My brain stuttered, searching for a mistake, a mix-up, an excuse I could believe. But then she explained, they had plans. My brother had a backyard gathering, and apparently it was more important than my doctorate ceremony. I couldn't process it. My entire life had built to this one day, and they had decided that burgers and hot dogs trumped my achievement, my sacrifices, my moment of recognition. The sting of betrayal was immediate. My heart pounded, my hands shook, and for a brief, terrifying second, I felt the world shrink around me. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't forgetfulness. This was a choice. My parents were actively choosing something else over me, over what I had worked so hard to achieve. And when my dad finally spoke, cutting across the phone line with the same tone he had used throughout my childhood to diminish my pain, he said 3 words I had heard 1,000 times before. Don't be dramatic. It was as if the floor beneath me disappeared. Every memory of being told I was overreacting, of being dismissed, of being told my feelings didn't matter, came crashing down. That one sentence encapsulated a lifetime of neglect disguised as parenting. All the achievements, all the effort, all the dreams, they didn't matter because in their world, convenience and the golden child came first. And in that moment, something inside me changed, something irreparable, something that had been quietly forming over years of being overlooked, crystallized into a decision that would alter my life forever. I realized that if I stayed, if I waited for them to see me, to applaud me, to acknowledge my existence, I would always be waiting, and waiting was a luxury I could no longer afford. So I made a choice. It wasn't rash, though it felt like it in the adrenaline rush of heartbreak. It was deliberate, calculated, and irrevocable. I would reclaim my life on my own terms. I started with a single step, changing my name. It was more than paperwork. It was a declaration, a severing of invisible ties that had kept me tethered to a family that never truly valued me. It was a way to take back control of the narrative, to ensure that I would no longer be erased in favor of convenience. As I filled out the forms, as I typed my new name with trembling hands, I felt the weight of years lift slightly from my shoulders. This wasn't about rebellion for the sake of drama. It was about self-preservation. It was about telling myself and the world that I existed, that my accomplishments were real, and that my worth wasn't determined by anyone else's recognition. Madison Murphy. Saying it out loud felt like breathing for the first time in years. It wasn't a betrayal. It was a rebirth. It was a rebirth. Driving to the courthouse to file the legal papers, I replayed the moments of the morning over and over. The fantasy I had held for so long, of being seen and celebrated, dissolved entirely. I saw the truth. They had never prioritized me. Not in school plays, not in scholarship ceremonies, not in birthdays, not even on the day that should have been mine above all. The memory of the barbecue photo they had sent lingered, a perfect staged image of happiness, of laughter, of a family that existed in their own version of reality while I was forced to perform in silence. The courthouse clerk stamped the documents without looking up. routine for her, monumental for me. I was no longer the invisible daughter. I was no longer someone who waited to be recognized. Every lawyer, every form, every official signature was a step away from the shadows they had cast over me and into the light of my own choosing. And as I walked out, carrying a small packet of papers that represented years of silent suffering, I knew that life had changed overnight. Not through magic. I understood that blood does not guarantee support, and that silence in the face of neglect is complicity. I had chosen myself in a world that had consistently told me to be small, to be invisible, to accept being second. And as I drove away, the skyline of my city stretching ahead of me, I felt a strange mixture of fear and exhilaration. Fear, because I was stepping into a world without the safety net I had always assumed existed. Exhilaration, because I was finally unbound, finally authoring the story of my own life without anyone else's hand on the pen. It was then, in that car, in the quiet aftermath of betrayal and realization, that I decided I would not just survive this new chapter, I would thrive. I would build a life that honored my sacrifices, my achievements, and my truth. I would show up for myself in a way my family never had. And in doing so, I would become the person I was always meant to be. The days that followed felt surreal, like stepping into someone else's life while leaving the old one behind like a discarded costume. My apartment, once cluttered with remnants of a childhood spent constantly proving myself, felt strangely empty, but free. Each box I packed carried fragments of the daughter I had been, the version of myself who still waited for validation that would never come. Photos, certificates, old letters, little trophies. They all went into one box, taped shut, labeled simply past. It wasn't anger that drove me, it was clarity. Each item was a relic of being overlooked, ignored, made small in a world that should have celebrated me. And as I left them tucked away in the darkest corner of the closet, I felt the first flicker of something I hadn't experienced in years: autonomy. Sitting in the cafe that afternoon, I felt a strange mixture of anxiety and relief. My parents had agreed to meet me in person, but on neutral ground. No house, no childhood rooms, no familiar echoes of past neglect. Just a table, a small space where truth could finally meet consequence. When I walked in, I saw them instantly. My mom looked smaller than I remembered, her shoulders slightly hunched, lines on her face deeper than before. My dad was the same familiar jaw, the same calm mask hiding irritation and discomfort. And my brother, the golden child, hovering behind, unsure how to navigate the territory he had long assumed was safe. I introduced myself with intention. "It's Dr. Madison Murphy now," I said. Saying it out loud didn't feel aggressive or dramatic. It felt right. It felt like the natural extension of the life I had built, the life that started the moment I decided to no longer be erased. The air was thick with unspoken tension, the kind that can't be smoothed over with apologies or small talk. I slid the photo from the day of my graduation across the table, a simple image of me alone in front of the fountain, cap and gown in place, smiling despite everything. "You chose a barbecue over me," I said quietly. I won't forget that. My mom's eyes brimmed with tears. "We said we'd celebrate later. Why are you making this about drama?" But it wasn't drama. It had never been drama. It was proof, evidence that the story I had been living was not simply a matter of perception. My father leaned in, voice low but firm. "You're going to regret this one day." I looked at him steadily. Maybe I will. But I already regret every year I spent begging for scraps of love from people who couldn't bother to show up. I'd rather regret walking away than regret never doing it. The conversation stretched on, words and silences colliding like waves. My parents tried to rationalize, to frame their absence as minor, as oversight, as a normal. But I had built my life on observing patterns, seeing truth where others chose convenience, the repeated dismissals, the prioritization of others over me, the constant gaslighting. It all led to this moment. It all led to this moment. And I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I simply held my ground, the weight of my years of work, pain and determination settling firmly in my chest. Afterward, I walked out of the cafe, sunlight streaming across the street, and I felt something I hadn't in years: unshakable clarity. My life had changed overnight because of one decision, not because I sought revenge. Not because I wanted to hurt anyone, but because I finally decided that my value wasn't dependent on anyone else's acknowledgement. I decided that my accomplishments, my existence, and my happiness would no longer be optional in the eyes of people who didn't see me. The following weeks were surreal. Messages, calls, and even distant relatives reached out, unsure how to reconcile the narrative they had believed for decades. Some were angry, some were ashamed, most were curious. And I realized that one decision, a single decisive act of self-preservation, had ripples that extended far beyond my own life. By stepping away, I created a space where truth could be visible, undeniable, and empowering not just for me, but for anyone who had ever been overlooked, ignored, or diminished. I continued my work at the clinic with a renewed sense of purpose. Every client who came in, every patient whose story mirrored mine, became a reminder that standing up for yourself, claiming your worth, and choosing yourself first is not selfish. It is necessary. I shared my experiences selectively, using my voice to create connection, to validate pain, and to model resilience. I discovered that my story, once a source of private grief, was now a beacon for others navigating toxic dynamics. And in the act of choosing myself, I found a profound freedom I hadn't imagined possible. Freedom from the weight of others' indifference, freedom to define my own identity, freedom to exist unapologetically in a world that had never prioritized me. The online responses were staggering. Strangers wrote to me, describing moments when they had felt invisible, dismissed, or devalued. They thanked me for articulating what they had always felt but never dared to voice. Some called it a revelation. Others called it validation. And through it all, I realized that my decision, the one that changed my life overnight, was not just a personal turning point. It had become a catalyst, proof that agency, courage, and self-recognition could ripple outward, influencing people and inspiring change beyond a single life. I began to see the subtle, profound ways my life had shifted. I walked differently, spoke differently, and interacted differently. My boundaries were firm, my priorities clear, my relationships intentional. I no longer sought approval from those who had never provided it. Nor did I allow old patterns to creep into my new life. Every day became a quiet affirmation of the decision I had made. The choice to step away from neglect, to claim my identity, to honor my achievements, no matter how small the acknowledgement from the world, was a radical, transformative act. And yet, even as I flourished, the lessons of the past remained. I never forgot the barbecue, the empty chairs, the dismissive tones, but those memories no longer hurt in the same way. They were proof, not pain, proof that I had survived a neglect, survived dismissal, survived a family that had consistently chosen convenience over connection. Proof that I could claim my life, my name, and my worth, and that I could do so without apology. Looking back, I understand that the decision to leave, to rename, to reclaim my story was the single most important choice of my life. It wasn't impulsive. It wasn't vengeful. It was deliberate, rooted in clarity, and executed with the precision of someone who had spent years being overlooked. My life changed overnight because I chose myself, not out of spite, not out of anger, but because I finally recognized that my existence and my accomplishments had intrinsic value, independent of anyone else's validation. And so, I continue to walk forward, each day an extension of that one decision. I am Dr. Madison Murphy, fully seen, fully present, fully unbound. My story is no longer a narrative of absence or invisibility. It is a story of empowerment, resilience, and unwavering self-recognition. To anyone watching, reading, or listening, when you feel invisible, overlooked, or dismissed, remember this. Your life can change overnight, not because the world finally notices you, but because you finally choose yourself. I started living as Madison Murphy before the paperwork was even finalized. I applied to jobs in cities far from the small town where my family's expectations and neglect had shaped every choice I made. I didn't know exactly what I wanted beyond space and the ability to breathe without judgment. Most places responded politely, but with rejection. A few with automated emails that never looked at my name, only at my credentials. But then, a small mental health clinic in a mid-sized city replied. The position wasn't glamorous, junior psychologist, heavy caseload, modest pay, but it offered me a canvas to build a life on my own terms. The director warned me a lot of our patients come from messy family situations. I almost laughed. Messy families were my specialty without even trying. Packing for the move felt like performing an autopsy on my past. I cataloged memories with precision. Each photograph, each award, each card from relatives who had subtly chosen someone else over me. Some memories stung more than others. The ones that were reminders of love that had been conditional, inconsistent, or absent. I could still see the barbecue photo from graduation day. My parents smiling in the background, completely unaware that the person whose milestone they ignored was sitting alone in a fountain courtyard, cap and gown in place, forcing a smile that hurt. That image became my symbol, my motivation. It was proof not of my failure, but of their choice to overlook me. When I arrived in the new city, the anonymity was liberating. I introduced myself as Dr. Madison Murphy, even though the legal papers weren't officially stamped yet. Saying it out loud felt like shedding someone else's skin. It was the first time I didn't flinch at the sound of my name. In my new apartment, I began small, unpacking, organizing, creating a space that felt like mine and mine alone. No reminders of old judgments, no subtle family obligations encoded in objects or photos. I was free to start anew, and the sense of possibility, so foreign yet intoxicating, pushed me forward. At the clinic, I met Ava, my assigned supervisor. She was sharp, observant, and had a presence that could both intimidate and comfort. On my first day, I noticed her watching the way I moved through the paperwork, how I listened to patients, how I absorbed every instruction. Later, over a long night of filing reports and debriefing sessions, she looked at me with that knowing gaze and said, "You sound like experience talking, not theory." I laughed softly. "You could say I've lived some of it," I said, showing her a truncated version of my story, just enough to give context. She nodded, silently acknowledging what I didn't even need to explain. In her presence, I felt seen, not by a family that had ignored me, but by someone who understood the weight of navigating a world where love and recognition were conditional. She asked one simple, transformative question: "What are you going to do with that?" It hit me harder than anything before. Not with guilt, not with sorrow, but with clarity. My past, the neglect, the dismissals, the empty chairs at milestones weren't just pain to bear. They were fuel. They were a lens through which I could shape my life, my work, and my purpose. They were a story, and it was mine to tell or bury. I decided then I would tell it, but carefully anonymously at first, so that my voice could be heard without repercussions from the family that had silenced me for so long. I started a blog under a pseudonym, Dr. M. I wrote about invisible children, about families where love was conditional, about moments where neglect disguised itself as normalcy. I wrote about my doctorate ceremony, the barbecue photo, the silence of my parents' seats. My words resonated in ways I hadn't anticipated. Messages came in. I thought I was alone. I thought I was overreacting. A thank you for saying it out loud. For every story I had held in, every tear I had cried alone, there were strangers somewhere who felt seen, who found validation in knowing that they weren't overreacting. They were surviving neglect that was real. 3 years passed, and the blog slowly grew into a community. My life expanded in ways that were impossible before. I had clients who respected me, colleagues who valued my input, friends who chose to be present consistently. Each day was a reminder that I could be a part of a chosen family, one that existed not out of obligation, but out of care, presence, and intentional love. And still, there were reminders of the old life, the occasional email, the rare forwarded meme, the few cold holiday greetings. They were minor compared to the world I had built, but they reminded me that the past was never far from reach. Then, unexpectedly, a journalist reached out. They had read one of my anonymous pieces and wanted a full interview, still keeping my identity protected. They said, "Your story could help people. It could give them permission to see the truth." I hesitated. Exposing my experience could have repercussions. It could bring my family into the spotlight in a way they would find uncomfortable, maybe even hostile. But I also knew the power of truth, the way it had already given strangers clarity, solace, and validation. I agreed. The interview went live, and the response was overwhelming. Messages poured in from people around the country, people who had been silenced, dismissed, or gaslit by the people they trusted most. I began to understand something fundamental. My decision, the single one that had changed my life overnight, wasn't just about me. It was about visibility, about reclaiming narrative, about showing that standing up for yourself doesn't require permission. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I felt a shift in power. That the family who had ignored me for decades now had to reckon with the fact that their actions were visible, judged not by them, but by the world. Desperate, pleading, some angry, some guilt-ridden. But I had learned to listen to the difference between apology and self-interest. They weren't calling because they realized their neglect had consequences. They were calling because the consequences were now tangible and inconvenient. And in that, there was clarity. I didn't owe them forgiveness. I didn't owe them access to the person I had become. My life had changed overnight because of one decision, and that decision had created boundaries, safety, and autonomy that nothing in my old life had ever allowed.